on civilization itself. And so that's definitely one of the threads I wanted to bring up. But also, I mentioned this in the introduction video about Dan Brown's books. You know, like millions of other people, I read his books and was enthralled by the thriller aspect. But I also was, I felt that there was something nagging in the back of my mind, like there's more to it. You know, I felt that the reason he became so popular and his books you know, became this huge phenomenon was that he was tapping into these topics which are just loaded with symbolism, like the Vatican and the Louvre Pyramid and the Freemasons and so on. And with my architectural training, I was interested in the buildings. So I started researching the Louvre Pyramid and Vatican Square and the Roman Pantheon and Rosslyn Chapel, Temple Church in London, and then the Capitol Building in D.C. and the Washington Monument and the House of the Temple. And these are just so loaded with symbolism that I sort of used it as a device in my Secrets in Plain Sight that I kept referring to different Dan Brown things. And, you know, Dan Brown has really done a service because he's brought all of these structures into people's minds, into the awareness. So all of those different threads led into creating Secrets in Plain Sight. But I guess I should talk about what are the secrets at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we can get into some of the material if we were, but it's interesting to hear a little bit about your backstory, as it were, Scott. But at what point then did you stumble into some of the work of Richard Heath and Rick Campbell and things like that? Was just as kind of along the way and by accident, or were you given some of this material?
Well, I sort of think that I've been on this initiatory a journey of the initiate or something, because books just kept landing in my lap. A friend would give me just the right book that had all the missing pieces that I was looking for, you know, and or I'd just go to the right website that had the right fascinating information that correlated with something else I was looking at. So I think it was, you know, definitely after I moved to Cortez Island, I started reading these books. And, you know, it really, I'm standing on the shoulders of giants here.
Yeah.
There's so many other researchers that I profile their work in Secrets in Plain Sight, and I have a books page at secretsinplainsite.com/books where I link to many of the books that I reference in the videos there.
Absolutely. And so, what would you say then is some of the most, you know, important aspects? I mean, again, we can, there's so much we can see from buildings, obviously, to monuments, and then of course incorporated into street designs themselves. We are seeing symbols and very, very potent occult messages, if you will, that are, you know, conveyed. But why don't you break it down a little bit for us and you know, run through some of the more important points, if you will, Scott?
Yeah, well, I think it all breaks down. There's different ways of looking at it, but you could say that it all breaks down to the Quadrivium subjects in the ancient liberal arts. I should say the medieval liberal arts. There are 7 medieval liberal arts, and they're broken down into 2 groups, the trivium and the quadrivium. The trivium is where we get the word trivial. The trivium subjects include logic, grammar, and rhetoric. And not that these are really trivial subjects, they're essential. You have to really master those subjects before you can communicate with others and think logically and so on. But the real meat is in the quadrivium subjects, and that includes number, music, geometry, and astronomy. And maybe that doesn't sound like it is the real meat, but within each of those subjects, there's a vast amount of depth that you can go into. In number, you can think of that as number theory or numerology. In geometry, which literally means earth measure, you can talk about sacred geometry and geomancy, which is a really huge subject I'm really keenly interested in. Also with astronomy, you can think of that as astrological symbolism or astronomical alignments that I found in different cities. But all of these subjects, essentially, it all goes back to ancient Egypt. I find a consistent Egyptian connections in the symbolism, which is another interesting thread. And I'd like to sort of go over examples from these different topics. And, I'll go over some numerological things and some geomancy and some sacred geometry and some astronomical alignments if we have time for all of that.
Absolutely.
All right. I think I can start with a concrete example of a number that, and everything is so interconnected that if I just kind of pull on this matrix at any point, it'll sort of lead me into everything else. In Secrets in Plain Sight, it's a lot easier just to watch it because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And so sometimes I'm going to be struggling here, maybe trying to explain something that it would just take 30 seconds for you to see it and get it.
That's right, and obviously the whole point, if you will, here, Scott, is obviously to help to bring attention to the series that you already done. I mean, the knowledge is out there, you presented it, and we urge all our listeners out there to do take the time and go to your website and take a look at the series because it's very condensed. It's well worth everybody's time if you're interested in this because it's highly packed, with some of the things that we'll go through here. But go ahead, Scott, and carry on.
Okay, let's look at the number 864. I identify this as the number of the sun because the sun's diameter is 864,000 miles. It also has to do with the Earth, though, because in one Earth rotation, that is a 24-hour period, there are 86,400 seconds. One of my favorite books I've ever read is called The Lost Science of Measuring the Earth by John Michel and Robin Heath. And I'm going to be referencing that now and again during this interview, but one of the facts from that book says that the distance between the center of Stonehenge and the edge of Silbury Hill is 864,000 feet. And I verified this in Google Earth. Google Earth is a great tool, by the way, and I did a lot of my geomancy research there, if you will.
Yeah.
But it has a measuring tool there where you can verify these things. And so just at this point, we have a problem, in a sense, because how was it that these ancient people that lived 5,000 years ago, that built Stonehenge and Silbury Hill, were encoding the size of the sun, which is measured in miles, with a distance on the ground measured in English feet?
Right, yeah.
And why is it that we measure time in this way, where that we have 86,400 seconds in a day?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So it may seem pretty unlikely, but the English foot is actually the root of the ancient metrological system. And this was cracked open by John Neal in his groundbreaking book, All Done with Mirrors. And the title uses mirrors because as above, so below, which is the Hermetic motto, is essential in this metrological system because all of the different units were related by fractions. And he's saying that the mirror is like the line you draw between the numerator and the denominator in a fraction. And it really blew my mind. It sort of takes a technical mind to understand all the metrology. But let me just jump to a more modern example of this number. The Place de la Concorde in Paris is the largest square in Paris. And it's the place where the guillotine was set up during the Revolution. And then later they tore that down and they replaced the guillotine with the obelisk from the Temple of Luxor in Egypt. They're right in the middle of this square. And this square has an area of 86,400 square meters. So there again, we have the number 864. But it doesn't matter whether we're talking square meters, miles, feet, or seconds. It's the numbers that matter.
Yeah.
And, this gets back to Pythagoras' motto that all is number.